Hello, my online learners, and welcome to the urinary system. And it's more than just about pee. When you're looking at the urinary system and how the kidney works, think about it in terms of one of the jobs is to balance the blood, and then extra stuff goes into the urine as opposed to just the formation of urine. Okay, again, we're going to look just pretty surface level. This chapter has more than you need to know this term, but we'll go through it and see what's up. So first off, the urinary system acts as a purification plant, and its main job is to clean the blood of waste materials. Now the liver does some, but it's the urinary system that actually controls the electrolytes and the balance and gets it out of the body. So the kidneys filter the blood, reabsorb the blood, secrete the ions, and produce urine. Without this important function, we will die within a few days. So when we're looking at it, let's look at the picture here. So the urinary system is pretty simple from the gross anatomy. You have two kidneys, and the kidneys are seen as what's called a retroperitoneal, which means they're behind the peritoneal cavity. So here's the cavity where your guts are, and then your kidneys are kind of strapped to the back of your abdominal cavity. Excuse me, strapped to the back of your abdominal cavity. And they're glued there. Also, they are half protected and only half protected by ribs. So this is why if you get a rib shot down here, you can actually do some damage to your kidneys. So the kidney is the main organ. Then the urine is collected in the ureters and stored in the bladder, and then transported outside the body with the urethra. In females, there's a separate tube to go out, and in males, the urethra goes in through the penis and shares the sperm and the ejaculate with it too, but not at the same time. Okay? So when we look at the overall system, two kidneys, bean-shaped, they're in the superior dorsal abdominal cavity. They filter blood, they make urine, and then there's a ureter, which is the tube that carries urine from each kidney to the single bladder. The bladder is basically an expandable sac that holds urine. It's got some interesting features about it in terms of the epithelial lining can actually flatten out and become more waterproof, which is kind of neat. The job of the urinary system is to balance the body's fluid and then make urine. So don't think of it as making urine. Think of it as the fact that it's controlling the body fluid and the balance first, getting rid of the waste and putting it into the urine. And then it makes a little more sense as to what the kidney does. So there's three processes we're going to look at: filtration, reabsorption, and secretion. And these processes are really quite detailed and go into there's hormone control or neural control of both of them, but we're not going to look in that much detail. So filtration, reabsorption, secretion. So first off, if we look at the kidney is a fibrous connective tissue called the renal capsule. And because of that, because of being so fibrous and kind of isolated, it was one of the first organs transplanted, and kidney transplants are very successful to this day. Good. And then coming out of the kidney, you have the blood supply, and the blood supply is very important because the job of the kidney is to filter the blood. So the renal artery comes right off of the descending aorta, so it's under high pressure, and then the blood is collected by the renal vein. The urine is collected by what's called the renal pelvis or the calyx. Okay. When you look at the kidney, there is there's a renal capsule outside to protect it. The renal cortex is the outside layer, and the renal medulla is the inside layer. And medulla and cortex are inside and outside words. And then you have the renal pelvis, which is where the urine collects. So as I said, the kidney has three layers: the cortex, which is outside, the medulla, which is the middle layer, and then the pelvis, which is the collecting ducts in the middle. Now, the blood is filtered by millions of tiny little filters, and these are called nephrons. And we'll talk about nephrons a little later on in the chapter. The renal pelvis will collect it, okay, as we talked about there. So that's the gross structure. There is a very good blood supply, huge blood supply. So the single renal artery will enter the kidney, branching into segments, and then those segments branch again and branch again and branch again. And then they go into what's called a glomerulus. You don't need to know all these until we get to the afferent arteriole, which is the small blood vessel going into the glomerulus. And then the efferent arteriole comes out of the glomerulus. Then there are blood vessels to collect the blood again. So let's look at the nephron. First off, when you look at the nephron, it's quite convoluted. So here is the blood coming in. You have your afferent arteriole, what's called your glomerulus, which is Latin for ball of string. I don't know if you knew that. Then the blood vessel comes out of the arteriole and it wraps around these convoluted tubules and the loop of Henle. And this is called the Peri tubular capillaries. Peri meaning around. So it's basically the capillaries that go around the tubule. This yellow structure here is called the nephron, and this is the functional unit of the body. In terms of naming the blood supplies, afferent, glomerulus, efferent, and then just peritubule network. And then it goes through a bunch of collecting tubes to eventually get to the renal vein. You don't need to know the in-between ones. Good. Now, when we look at it, there is a blood flows into the glomerulus, and everything but blood cells and large molecules will form into or flow into the nephron, forming what's called the filtrate. So here is our nephron, the yellow part. Let's look at it. This is, first off, the capsule. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of names for this capsule. The traditional name is the Bowman's capsule, but if we're trying to get rid of names with names in them, this is often called the glomerular capsule. Then there is the proximal convoluted tubule, remembering that proximal means close and distal means far away, and here's your distal convoluted tubule. In between the two tubules is this long loop of Henle, or the loop of the nephron, and that goes into the medulla, and that's used to create a concentration gradient to pump water in. Okay? Good. So, at the glomerulus, everything, the first process is called filtration. Everything but large blood vessel, large proteins and white blood or red blood cells go into from the glomerulus into the glomerular capsule. So that proves that the kidney is really a bad filter, but it's a very good absorber. So we talked about the three processes. The first process is filtration. So glomerular filtration, the blood from the renal artery is filtered into the glomerulus. The filtered products contain everything: water, sugar, nutrients, waste, good and bad. So everything goes in. Then there's tubular reabsorption. This is taking stuff from the filtrate and putting it back into the blood. And there's a lot of complicated processes here that we won't get into. But I want you to realize that a lot of it is transported out. So it starts with sodium being transported out, water follows, and it goes back into the blood. Then at the end, there's what's called tubular secretion. And secretion is when you're going from the blood back into the nephron to be exported. And this is fine tuning to be removed of the body. Then there's this loop of the nephron, and that has hormones will control this final opportunity to remove sodium, and water will follow if it needs it. And then the bad things, the urea, the uric acid, and the ammonia will leave the body, and hopefully all the good is reabsorbed. So we're looking at three processes: filtration, where everything but blood cells go from the blood into the filtrate; reabsorption, which is the filtrate takes nutrients and puts it back into the blood; And then tubular secretion is the fine tuning at the end, where if there's anything in the blood that they want out, it goes from the blood back into the nephron. Okay, a lot of urine formation. Here we go. So filtration, reabsorption, and secretion are our processes. During filtration, the fluid and molecules pass into the glomerular capsule, and you have cross filtration composed of the capillary walls. Filtration flow into the renal tubule is controlled by hormones and also blood pressure. Then you have reabsorption and secretion. Reabsorption is you're going from the tubular into the blood. Secretion is blood back into the tubule, and then it will leave with the urine. Okay. Now, there's a lot of different hormones that will control this process. They're a little advanced for this course, but we'll get to them in the next one. One of the things that we talk about is filter size. Small, or basically large, and cells don't go through. Pressure has to do with your blood pressure to push things through. Diabetes mellitus is a situation where there is so much glucose in the blood that not all of it gets reabsorbed, and as a result, there is glucose in the urine. Okay. Polycystic kidney disease is many cysts. Because there are cysts there, it interferes with normal production. And then you have a polycystic kidney. It is controlled by chemistry, and it is controlled by permeability. Just to give you an idea of the complexity here, more details will come at higher levels. I just want you to get the general idea of what's going on with the nephron. Also, the hormones can change it. So antidiuretic hormone, aldosterone, anti-natriuretic peptide, and also the renin-angiotensin aldosterone system. We're not going to go into the detail of these. Okay. Kidney stones is an application where the urine, being very salty, sits in the bladder. As a result, it forms stones. The stones can be formed of many things, and they produce pain when they leave. Let's look briefly at the bladder. The bladder is basically a hollow organ posterior to the pubic symphysis. It has this what's called transitional epithelium to allow for stretching. It also has pleats called rugae in it to allow for stretching. Okay, there are two sphincters that control urination. The internal one, which is involuntary, internal involuntary, and the external one, which is voluntary, and that has to do with your pelvic floor. The urination reflex is triggered by stretch, and a full bladder will send a signal to the spinal cord, and then you'll have the urge to urinate. The urine will leave via the urethra, and it's actually quite a lot of control on the process of urination, because although you have the urge to go, you can also voluntarily stop it until you have access to a bathroom. Okay? And that's enough on the kidney. There's a lot of different applications there. I just want you to have a quick look at them. You won't be tested on them. Thanks. Bye.